A physicist with a passion for solving problems with data, is our next guest on Ready STEM Go. I'm Mackenzie Oliver, and today talking about why data matters is Brendan Langfield. Welcome, Brendan.
Hello, nice to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So from playing bass guitar for a rock band and traveling around Australia to competing on MasterChef, Brendan's STEM journey looked a little different and started a little later than others at 27. Brendan completed his honours year in computational neuroscience. His thesis focused on network theory, simulation, and computational visualization. Since graduating in 2017, Brendan has been drawing on his skills in physics and computer science in research roles for ANU, QUT, and the Queensland Institute of Medical Research in the field of neurophotonics and biofabrication. Brendan is now working as the Assistant Director of Enterprise Analytics and Data Science for Services Australia. So before we jump into all of that, we'll start off with a little STEM story, STEM fact. Have you brought an epic, inspiring, or crazy STEM story with you today, Brendan?
Potentially epic. Kudos as well, because you've done your research, which is excellent. I've forgotten some of those things that I've done historically. Okay. I was reflecting on something very interesting that I learned back when I was helping research in neuroscience, and you mentioned the neurophotonics research work I did, which was at ANU, and then I did some other neuroscience related stuff with QUT and QIMR. But something that blew me away when I learned it was what we call the neurophysiological correlates of memory and learning. So there's a term that's thrown around a lot these days, which is neuroplasticity. You hear it all the time that the brain changes itself, and obviously it does. But the method by which it actually changes itself is really, really interesting. So some of the researchers that I worked with while I was doing my research were part of the team that discovered this. And so basically, when you learn something, particularly something that's rote learning, so if you're trying to learn the piano and play a song, or shoot a basketball over and over and over again, basically what happens is in your brain, whenever you do anything, you move your fingers, you move your eyes, whatever it is, your neurons fire, right? And so then there's all these connections between your neurons. And so these electrical impulses flow between the neurons, and it's this electrical activity that causes you to do anything. And so when you do something, basically, we knew for a long time that when a neuron fires, it'll send a signal like downstream, you can imagine. And that'll cause the neuron next in the sequence to fire, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then they discovered that it also actually sends a little bit of a signal upstream, which is called back propagation. And basically what this means is whenever you do something, the signal that's sent upstream makes it easier the next time you do that same activity for that pathway to be followed by the electrical activity. So basically, it forges a path. So the next time you do something, it's slightly easier. And the next time you do something, it's slightly easier. And so you end up with these really robust pathways in your brain that have been done many, many, many times. So it's kind of like, a river flowing downstream and forging new pathways. Your brain's got this physical correlate where it actually does something physically to result in you learning a new skill, which I think is pretty cool.
Wow. Yeah, I guess you'd imagine it's just the electrical signals, but to actually know that there is a physical change going about in your brains when you're trying to learn something new. Yeah, I'd say that's probably definitely epic. You got it spot on there.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
So yeah, let's start talking about your STEM journey. So going to uni at any age is always definitely going to be daunting. But I'm guessing it's probably even a little more so when you step onto the campus for the first time as a mature age student. Do you remember like the kind of inspiration that it was for you to start studying at 27?
Yeah, so whether it's more or less daunting, I'm not sure. You're certainly a different person at 27 compared to 17. You've probably got very different expectations of yourself and others and all those kinds of things. So, you certainly come into university expecting a different experience. So I guess the catalyst for me was I'd done a whole bunch of other things. As you mentioned in the intro there, I've done everything from playing in bands all over the country, working in retail, doing crappy jobs. I was in Hungry Jack's, when I was 24, I think, flipping hamburgers. I've done everything. And then something I realized I hadn't done was really pursue I guess, my intellect and see how far I could go with my brain. I've done a lot of physical stuff and artistic things. And at high school, I was pretty competent. I got a good OP, which was the score at the time. And I quite enjoyed high school, but I'd never gone to pursuing education further. So for me, it was a bit of a shift in pursuing something that I hadn't done before, and something that was challenging as well. And then, at that age as well, you're starting to think about, jobs and income and long-term and family and all those kind of things. So it was also about upskilling myself into something that I thought had future value that would really lay a strong foundation for me for the next 20, 30 years or however long it is until retirement age is these days.
Yeah, so it sounds like almost a bit of a moment of clarity there. But did you have any reservations of that returning to study, like you said, pursuing the intellect path?
Absolutely. So I think there were elements of clarity where it was like, okay, I think I need to go back to university, and sort of commitment to that, because once you go online and apply and you get your acceptance offer, then you're pretty committed. But there was certainly a lot of uncertainty around how it would actually go, particularly when there's been such a large gap of time between any formal education. So for me, there was a lot of questions I had to figure out for myself about whether I could actually study anymore. Going into physics as well in particular, I was aware that the burden of mathematics was going to be really, really high, and I hadn't done basically any math for 10 years or so. So I had to really, really quickly figure out whether I had the skills to do that or not. And so I did a bit of pre-work before I got in, and got online and did as much sort of general upskilling as I could before I started uni, which is, I think, a good idea for anybody. But then the real trial was once I actually got in, obviously, and started studying. And then I realized pretty quickly that you didn't necessarily have to be the smartest person in the room to do well. You just had to be committed and be willing to work hard.
No, definitely. And that's very true for anyone of any age, of any background. Like when you're stepping into that classroom, like you can't expect it to come easy. It is about, being committed to it. Hey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you find, again, no matter what degree you do, that's what separates the people who are there in the first 3 months to the people who are there in your last 3 months. And, numbers dwindle. And usually it's not because of someone's intelligence. It's really just their commitment or their willingness to do the hard things that don't come easy.
Yeah. And well, considering that you went from, the first 3 months right through to an honors year in, what was it? Computational visualization?
Computational neuroscience. And it was done through a physics degree here at QUT. So that was a collaborative project between QUT and QIMR, the Queensland Institute of Medical Research. So in my final honours year, actually, there was 3 people left. So we went from a starting class of, I guess in the physics cohort, it must have been close to 100, and there were 3 in honours year. So, you've got to stick it out and stay with it.
So, you said that your thesis was with QIMR. How did you get into that space?
Yeah, so after my undergrad in physics, I did an honours research topic that was a collaboration between QUT and the Queensland Institute of Medical Research. And so that was in the neuroscience realm, which is obviously very different from the kind of things I started studying. I started out really interested in astrophysics and cosmology and all those sort of popular science things that get people really hooked on physics. And then the more I kind of started studying, I realized that physics was a lot more broad than just astrophysics. There's a lot of other realms. And so I started just putting feelers out for other things that interested me. So I started reading a lot of books as well on how the brain works and consciousness and really interesting topics like that. And realized really quickly that there's a really big, market for physicists to go and work in those other spaces where, wherever the hardest problems exist, there's basically physicists there trying to help solve them. So I essentially just reached out to a whole bunch of people working on interesting problems and told them who I was and the kind of skills that I had. And luckily enough, people were interested to have me on board.
Yeah, if you were certainly trying to chase those challenging problems, I think the brain's a pretty good spot to start.
Yeah, potentially the hardest one, potentially.
Yeah, potentially. So then when you went from like the neurophotonics, and now your role has chased more of a data science set, how did you find that transition after leaving uni into data science?
Yeah, good question. So it was an interesting one. So when I finished my honours, I obviously had quite a lot of options. I could stay in academia if I wanted to. I had a lot of good options to stay and continue studying computational neuroscience, or a lot of other realms in physics as well. But I decided for me, I was 29, 30 by the time I graduated. I can't remember anymore. But I really wanted to get out into the real world and start doing stuff. Not to say that academia isn't doing stuff, but there was a lot of businesses that interested me, a lot of areas that I felt like I could go and contribute really quickly. So I essentially just applied for a whole bunch of grad programs. So a lot of big businesses have grad programs. I would recommend that if you're in your last year of study, which I think you are, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Right. So I get on the grad programs early and just apply for as many as you can possibly think of, because you can always turn them down if you get them, right? And then
Something for my to-do list.
Yeah, exactly. And so then I ended up getting offered one with Services Australia, formerly Department of Human Services, and I decided to take that because it was local. It was a really good looking place to go and work. So I took that up, and as you alluded to, it's a very different domain to being an academics or studying physics and neuroscience. But I will say it's equally as challenging in very different ways. And so what I've really been able to take from my studies and some of my academic research into the business space is how to approach really difficult problems. And I think that's something that's really valuable, particularly for anybody who studies quantitative sciences, whether that's physics or chemistry or mathematics, whatever it may be. You have the ability to become a very good problem solver, and companies love problem solvers. So that's kind of what I do on a daily basis now is we look at areas of the business that might need improvement, or where there's problems, or where people are just looking to get better outcomes. And we help them understand the complex systems they have and search for ways to improve them. And that whole process is very much like when you approach a hard physics problem, about breaking something down that seems completely insurmountable, breaking it down into little parts and finding ways to solve it. So that's the real link between studying something like physics and ending up in a company helping them solve problems.
Yeah, well, they definitely sound like they'd be lucky to have you if you're really gung-ho on going in, solving their problems. I'm sure a lot of businesses would be very impressed with having someone on board like you.
I try.
So yeah, you spoke a bit about like that kind of problem-solving background. Was there something in particular from uni that really pushed you into that space of very specifically like problem solving, or like with data science?
I think like the physics degree in general just taught me that that's what I liked. So again, solving problems, and whether they were, really heavily mathematically based problems, and whether they were more conceptual, whether it was a visualization problem, like how do I best portray this data so people understand it, whatever it was. I just really enjoyed being given a problem to work on and come up with a novel solution. And so physics was a great way to develop those skills and hone them and realize that I was good at that. Certainly you would encounter that in many, many other fields of study as well. But that was the main thing for me, was during that physics degree and encountering even those really difficult math problems, which I wasn't great at, but I had to work hard at to solve. I learned a lot of skills about resilience in when facing a really difficult problem, and that's translated really well to me in the workforce.
Yeah, well, that ties in very well to the next thing I was going to touch on. In your bio, it also says that you are a person driven to affect change. How do you feel? Do you get to fulfill that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think no matter where you are, and so whether it be in academia or even in industry where I am now, there's always some separation between you and the change you're actually affecting. So, I don't work on the front line, for example, of our agency, and there are people, who, when you go into a Centrelink office or Services Australia office, there's someone there to serve you, and they are the person really impacting you directly. But we're helping improve the systems that those people use that then allows them to help the people directly. So no matter where you are, you've got to really figure out the context for what you're doing. And you'll probably find if you go down the line far enough, you can really influence how someone lives, or the quality of someone's life. And so for me, when I say driven to affect change, it really is just about trying to keep that tangible and keeping the context around problems, because often you can be working away at something in isolation or in a black box and not realize where it fits in the grand scheme. So I just want to always make sure that if I'm working on a problem, I understand who it's going to impact and who it's going to benefit.
Like having that context, that scope.
Exactly, absolutely. I always say that if you want like a good team, you need to be able to set the context for that team, and this I'm sure applies in academics as well as in industry. You need to let people know that the piece they're working on contributes to a larger piece and what that actually means, because otherwise it's very easy to lose motivation.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, it's almost all the time that we have for our interview today. But before I let you go, I'll ask you, what is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
All right, so I kind of have two. I couldn't split between them, so I'll give you two. They're very different though. So one actually came to me through someone we were working with when I was playing in bands, and it's resonated with me forever. Woody, if you're out there, this is your quote. So he told me, be kind to people on the way up because you'll meet them again on the way back down. And so in that context, that was, when we were becoming popular in the band space, you come across people that you think are on a different level to you, and it's very easy to just brush them off or not give them the time of day. But at some stage, you have to come back down the ladder, and those sort of people are always going to be there. And that's resonated for me, though, in industry as well and through university, because quite often you never know where someone's going to end up and whether they can help you or you can help them. So I think it's really important to always, treat everybody with respect and courtesy and acknowledge them regardless of what level they're at. So, even in my current roles, when we have people who might be on a different pay scale or structure to you, to treat them just as equals essentially, because again, you never know in 5 or 10 years time, they might be your boss or they might be working for you in a different context, and you want to maintain relationships wherever you can. So I think that's been really important for me. And the second one, which is really, I learned it in industry specific context, but I think it's just generally applicable to life, is that complexity is the enemy of action. And so whenever anything's too hard and you can't decide, really what you need to do is simplify. And again, just break down the problem, break it down into tiny little chunks that you can answer. And in that way, simplify a problem and actually take some action on it. So, again, I do that very regularly at work. We take these big, massive, complex problems and we help people make decisions based on them. But I think in life in general, if you can sort of simplify whatever you're struggling with or whatever decisions you need to make, it can really help you take some action.
No, awesome. So yeah, keeping the kindness flowing and keeping it simple as well to kind of keep pushing you forward.
Yep, absolutely. That was well summarized. Thank you.
No, beautiful. Well, thank you so much again for your time today. Definitely learned a lot as well. It was a pleasure to have you on, Brendan.
Lovely. Pleasure to be here.
And to our listeners, thank you again for listening to Ready STEM Go. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep in touch and never miss an episode. Also join our Facebook group, QUT STEM is for me, to access more resources and events. Thank you, guys.